Well, good evening, afternoon, good night, wherever you are. Welcome to another episode of Chairmen of the Boards. As you can tell, as you can't because you're driving and you're actually listening, so just envision, we are a chairman down. Chairman Mason is on a trip, and we are grateful for him, to be able to take some time off and everything. And today it's going to be Grant and I.
Hello.
Say hi, Grant.
Hi, Grant. That's an XTS thing, right?
That is, I've been watching so many of their videos lately, and I was like, I have it stuck in my head. So shout out to XTS on that one. Well, I'm excited about this episode. We're going to hold down the fort while Mason is out, and we're going to talk about basically our favorite rigs that we've done in the past, from clients giving us basically everything from A to Z on how they want everything done. They just need us to execute the wiring setup to things that we've kind of collaborated on. So I'm super excited to get into today's just process on how everything, how you can plan out. I actually posted a video this morning on like when you properly plan out your signal chain or your signal flow, assembling it, especially if you're doing it yourself, significantly is easier. Your whole signal chain feels cleaner. The layout can feel cleaner. So I'm excited to dive in today. Do you have anything you want to say before we jump in?
Yeah, I think the idea in my mind behind the episode is basically that we both are working with people to build a rig from the ground up. And one of the biggest things that I think that we can offer people is our experience. And not saying, and I'm not trying to come across as being arrogant by saying that, but when you have someone that spends day in and day out planning out pedal boards, or their hours are spent, fixing cars, like you want to go to someone that has a lot of experience doing this type of thing. And I think in my mind, the thing I wanted to chat about or focus on was sometimes you get people coming in wanting board builds, and they know what they want and they know why they want it. And when that is the case, you generally end up with a much better result because you can plan the layout, you can plan the signal chain, the pedal choice to suit the end goal. Versus a lot of times, and this is not wrong by any means, but a lot of times the opposite is true, where they come to you saying, I really want a board build. I want it to be solid. I want it to work for years to come. And you kind of chat through like, well, what's your end goal? What do you want to use this for? What sound are you going for? And they tend to lean more on your suggestions as the builder, which, I mean, this is kind of, it goes both ways, where sometimes I wish people would listen to my experience more, and they don't. And then other times they kind of are leaning on it too much. And so I realize I'm kind of playing the fence here a bit, but I think there are some standout boards like this really came together nicely, and these are the reasons why. And I want to chat about, if you're building your board, or you want to get someone else from a totally another, maybe XTS or some other company doing your board builds, maybe here are some tips that you can actually go into that board build to get a better result. And we can kind of chat about how we see that play out in the day-to-day board builds, today and in our experience. I actually had a lot of fun prepping for this episode, because I went back 2-3 years just kind of scrolling through old files, old photos of boards we've done. And there were definitely a few standouts that I really like how this came together. And the majority were like, yeah, it was a good board, but it's kind of, it got the job done for that customer, but, it doesn't really stand out to me as being a board that is unique or serves a really unique, targeted purpose. I think if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm being a little too vague, but
nope, makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm excited whenever we can have an episode that is its purpose in my mind is to prevent common mistakes for both us as we chat. Like I learn a whole lot from you, Brian, and both for us as we chat, and also for the people that are, giving their valuable time to listen to the episode. I think we can avoid a lot of common mistakes just because we have made them. Like we've made a lot of these mistakes many times over, and now we've learned from them, and we can pass that info on.
Yeah. No, I agree completely. I think setting listeners, viewers up for success is the main goal to just get everything rolling. So we'll jump on in. Grant, do you want to share your first
Yeah,
one with us?
let me just awkwardly get over to
Yeah,
my screens here,
I didn't
and
give him
I'm
any
going to
heads up.
show you. I'm going to show you guys a hybrid board, and that's actually
Nice.
one of the reasons that I like this board. It has some of my favorites on it. Let me just expand. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm going to bring up some photos. This board was for a guy named Vincent or Vince, and I think you've actually done work with him as well, Brian. I'm pretty sure.
Oh yeah.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to share my screen for those of you that are watching. Tell me if this shows up all right, Brian.
Yeah. Nice.
You got a quad Cortex board on your screen?
I do.
Okay, so this is a board we did maybe a couple years ago now. And what I like about this, I love the quad Cortex, and it can do obviously so much, but I also still love standalone pedals. I love the ability to get a quick visual cue of what your settings currently are and be able to tweak that according to what you want to hear. So if you're listening on screen, we have a board that, I don't know, what would you say, Brian, is like 24 by maybe 16-ish. It's an angled board. It has a Cali compressor on it. It has an Expression, a PBC6X, a Maris LVX, which is such a fun pedal. And I'm going to tell you why I love that is on the board in a sec. A Big Sky, and it has two Kingsley pedals, a Harlot and a Page, which are kind of like gain-based preamp, very incredible pedals. So it's not a huge board. It's not a tiny board. Some would say this board is overkill because of the quad Cortex. Why would you need anything else? Why would you put the quad Cortex on there in the first place if you have all these individual pedals? Like, it's kind of a middle ground. But why I like it, the quad Cortex, for those that aren't aware, is a multi-effect modeling amp and cab sim, route effects any way you want them to be inside the unit, and it also has some effects loops. So in the first effects loop, this is, you might not realize or you might not think that this is how it's routed, but basically the guitar comes into the board, plugs into the compressor via a side panel, plugs into the compressor, then goes into the quad Cortex. And I might be getting some of these details slightly wrong, but basically it is, sorry. Into the side panel, into the quad Cortex. In effects loop 1 of the quad Cortex is the 6X. In the 6X, you have the compressor, the Page, which is again a gain preamp, and the Harlot. Then you leave the quad Cortex and go to the LVX, which is like a granular delay. Again, it does a whole lot of things, filter, a bunch of stuff. Then into the Big Sky, then into a long line, and then out of the board underneath. And so what you can actually do is you can set up a preamp if you wanted, one of the Kingsley pedals. You can run your amp and cab sim on the quad Cortex, and you can model your own amps, you can model pedals, you can do all sorts of stuff. But one of my favorite things, I don't know if you've had a similar experience, Brian, but if you have an amp and cab sim and you can pair it with a really good preamp like is on this board, and you could even make the argument you don't even need an amp and cab sim. You could just do a power amp and cab sim with this, what I'm about to say. But if you have an always on preamp, it tends to make the amp and cab sim sound a little bit more lively and true to the real amp, the actual amp that would be pushing air in real life, the physical amp. So I've done experiments with this with like an Iridium, a Strymon Iridium, or a Walrus ACS1, and it tends to just do you a few favors as far as making it sound a little bit more lifelike, I guess.
Yeah.
And this is not just the quad Cortex. This is just any amp and cab sim. It tends to help. And so I really love that. I love, again, that you have the instant access to the knobs in front of you while also being able to pull up any effects that you really need. Let's say it's one of those like 5 to 10% effects. I don't use it that often, but man, it's great to have a rotary on that song, or it's really good to have a panning tremolo. The Quad Cortex will do all of that and give you a lot of tweakability and presets and programming, whatever you need. You can do that with the Quad Cortex. And then you have the LVX, and I'll stop talking after this, but
no, you're good. I love this.
The LVX, like, why would you have a delay when you have the Quad Cortex there? The Quad Cortex does delays, and it does great delays, except the LVX is so unique, and it does just certain like glitchy descending filters. And I think on the website it has this like cassette option, like a audio example, lo-fi stuff. Like, it does stuff that a typical multi-effects or a multi-effects unit, which needs to cover a wide range of effects, the LVX goes so deep in this one niche area of delay and filter and granular type sounds that you can't expect any multi-effects unit out there to do what the LVX does. And so that's where I think the LVX is such a great pairing if you're into those sounds, which not everyone will be. But if you need that type of sound, it makes a lot of sense to get a standalone pedal that can do that sound that you need, which you won't be able to get to the same depth as a multi-effects. And so that's kind of what I really love about this thing. And I'm a huge fanboy of Kingsley. I was actually just emailing Simon this morning, and I'm not name dropping because I don't have any relationship with Simon, but that's the owner, Simon Jarrett. Monster guitar player. Kingsley pedals and preamps, mainly gain based, unbelievable. And I'm just a big fan. So whenever I see Kingsley on a board, I'm like, okay, yeah, I'd play that board just for the sake that it has Kingsley on it. So big fan of that. I'll quickly show you underneath the board as well, because my last favorite thing about this, if I can get my mouse to show up here, is that it has the Chalks power supply underneath. And the Chalks, super reliable. Obviously, it has the RCA jacks and switchable voltage on every outlet. And it's just a nice, clean, easy to use, system. And the board would take a bit of a learning curve. It has with the PBC 6X, there's a bit to learn there with MIDI and all that. But once you got this, you could pull up any effect in series, in parallel. You could reorder the loops in the Quad Cortex and in the 6X. Like, it's just, the options here are pretty incredible when you think about it. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it, or if there's anything that you would even hate about this board, Brian. But
nothing.
I'm curious what you think about it.
What it's an Aero board again? Aero, right?
I believe so. I
guess if you flip it over, the back.
Yeah, it's Aero.
Yeah, Aero. Yeah. So, like, is that Quad Cortex up on like any riser, or is it flat on the board?
We would have raised it up just a little bit with double dual lock.
Well, you also have that Quad 3D printed.
Yeah, that was done after this board. So this board was done in 2022, I think. Again, I was going back. I was like, oh yeah, this one. I really liked this one. But the Quad Cortex, I think the riser for that we only started doing this year, I think, because a customer requested it.
I see. Yeah, no. I think that's a great setup. I'm curious, did he come to you with the signal chain, or is it kind of like this is what we suggest? He
had a good idea of what he wanted. I think originally, and I could be wrong, but because it was a couple years ago now, but I think originally it was the Kingsleys up front in the 6X, and then the 6X plugged into the Quad Cortex. And then as we chatted and he was telling me what he wanted, I was like, oh, what about putting them in the loop of the Quad Cortex so you can run some effects before it, before the compressor and the Kingsleys. And it ended up working, and he ended up liking the idea. But my memory might be a little askew on that. But I do remember a conversation about the pedals coming before the QC, and we ended up with them in the Quad Cortex loop. Yeah. Kind of like loop inception. We got loops within loops and reorderable loops within loops. And it's, So there's not that many physical pedals on the board,
Yeah.
But there's a lot you can do with what is on the board, and I love that.
Nice. Yeah, no. I think it's funny that you had a hybrid QC build. I also pulled up one too. So
take it away.
That's the cool thing about like the QC, the hybrid stuff, is that like it's the main thing people will point at, is they'll be like, oh, why do you need all those external pedals when the QC can do it, or QC can do this? And sometimes it's just mainly people just like the sound of those pedals. They don't want to have to capture them. They like the physical pedal. I have both setups, so I can understand it, and it makes perfect sense. So having these hybrid setups, it's also cool too, because then you can swap out or experiment it. And it always goes back to, oh, what about the capturing? Sometimes people just don't want to capture it. It's just how it is. It's just, they don't want to spend the time. I've never captured.
Yeah. I will say, like, I've done the capture, and it's actually Quad Cortex made it really easy.
Yeah.
I didn't even have to look at a manual. I remember the first time I did, I was like, let's just see if I can figure it out. And I got it first try. Like, they made it so, and that's not saying I'm intelligent. That's saying they made it really easy to do. But I will say, whenever I am, like, often I don't have a board built. I'll be just ripping things apart for videos or whatever it is. And I'm like, my favorite pedals obviously make it in the videos, but they also make it on my board. So things just get trashed all the time. And so the convenience factor, usually if I have to play last minute, it's just, oh, okay, grab the Quad Cortex and I can go whip up some presets and I'll be good to go. So I do love that, but I think my perfect world would still be some sort of hybrid rig. Yeah. Where I get my favorite standalone pedals, assuming I don't have to rip them off for doing content or whatever. And then I also get the flexibility of a multi-effects amp and cab sim, scroll through all your favorites and select them and just get to playing guitar, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do love a hybrid rig, which is probably why, and it sounds like you're there as well. It's probably why we both have them on our list, because they just are attractive to us. It's nice to have all the options without a like 48 wide board. You know, it's yeah.
Yes.
It's
yeah. Good. And I did one hybrid bridge. I couldn't find it. It was like on a 32x16 elevation board, and it was massive. A big one. So it was a big old guy, and it had a ton of overdrives. But this one I have, if you can see it, can you see it?
Yep.
There we go. So this is
also, oh no, sorry. I thought that was an LVX at the first. I was like, oh, LVX as well. But it is, top middle is LVX and then H90. Yeah. Hey.
H90 and then the microcosm hologram. So it was very similar. The interesting thing about this one is that this client, he's done a bunch of builds with me. We did a big like mega rack build years ago. There's like 30 something pedals in it, and he wanted.
Oh, I remember that guy. Yeah, I remember you posting
that guy.
Him. Yep.
Yes, and so he wanted to do this one, which it's very unique on how it's wired. He basically came to me, is like, I want all these in the board. How do we make it work? There's only 2 effects loops, and that's kind of where people kind of get stuck on.
2 effects loops in the Quad Cortex, right?
Yeah, sorry. 2 Quad Cortex effects loops. Since you're listening, so basically this is on a Creation Elevation 24x16. I got a Quad Cortex, a Mission Expression pedal, a Morningstar MC6 Pro, an H90 from Eventide, a Microcosm hologram, and we got an LVX, and then we got 2 Chase Bliss pedals, a mood, and a
one of the limited runs they did, right?
A gen loss.
Yeah.
So obviously not all of these pedals can work properly, and they could work in the FX sweep. You could just run them all in stereo. These are the new Chase Bliss Mark II versions, so they all have stereo and everything. But he didn't want to do that. He was like, no, I'd rather be able to pull something off, putting something else on, leave it off. So that's actually why, and I think I have a photo for it. The underside, yeah. So it's got quite a bit of goodies. Yeah, jeez. So quite a bit of goodies underneath. The Zuma, Ojai, a Crooks for the, which is power. Zuma and Ojai for power, and then out of the Ojai into the Crooks for the Quad Cortex. And then we also have a Disaster Area 4 MIDI box. Then we have a RJM Megax and a Goodwood Audio long line. So it's a lot of stuff, and there's actually a couple of reasons. Is because how he's using it is really interesting. Is I don't know if I have a side. I don't think I have a side panel picture. No, I don't. Oh, I guess I just liked my own post. But basically, it's set up to do vocal and guitar. So it's going in on the side, and it's immediately hitting the input one, and then input one is
of the quad
using
Cortex.
sorry, yeah, I keep forgetting. I have to explain it all over because of audio. But yeah, so we're hitting input one on the quad Cortex, and then the quad Cortex effects loop one send is actually hitting the inputs of the Megax. So then the Megax has the H90, the hologram, the LVX, and the two chase bliss pedals all in the Megax in stereo. So they're all in stereo, and then we're going stereo out, returning back in return 1 and 2 of the quad Cortex. So then, of course, with doing a vocal mic, we're doing vocal into, I think, number 2, and I actually used a TRS pancake for this just because of space. The XLRs are too tight for the vocal side, and the vocal is actually going out the main XLR connectors on the quad Cortex to the side of the board, and the outputs, the 1/4 inch, I think it's output 1 and 2 are 1/4 and 3 and 4 are XLR on the quad Cortex. So outputs 1 and 2 are going to the long line, and then the long line has 2 XLR outs to the side of the board, and then 2 1/4 inch outs. So depending if he wanted to use amps in the quad Cortex, he could go XLR direct into a system, or he could bypass the amps in the quad Cortex and go with your receive box, 2 amps or 1/4 inch to 2 amps if they're close by, or he could run all 4 at the same time. So there's a lot of stuff packed in here, and the reason for the Megax and stuff is because the MC6 actually has all of the CC messages on the Megax to toggle things on and off. Nice. But the way in which this is set up with the quad Cortex, which makes it really handy, is when you set it up with the effects loop and then send and return and everything, you can, in the quad Cortex, you can actually place where you want certain pedals. So like if you put the effects loop in the middle of the chain, anything before the effects loop in the quad is before the amps, and then anything after the effects loop or after the amp or whatever, however you set it up. Like if you have an amp and cab block and then the effects loop is in the middle of that, anything after that, reverbs or extra delays or stuff, you're essentially doing the 4 cable method, or 5, I guess it's 4 cable method. So he just wanted pretty much all there. He wanted all the options. So everything is MIDI controlled. The expression is dual expression with the toes, so they're both wired into the quad Cortex. The quad Cortex can be controlled from the MC6. So like everything on here is MIDI, and everything is being basically, the MC6 is the brain, and then it goes to the Megax, then the Megax goes to the quad Cortex, and then the quad Cortex goes to, I think, the MIDI box 4, and the MIDI box 4 then goes to the H90 hologram LVX, and then
that's a long MIDI chain.
It's a lot, and it was something that I was like, if we do anything else, we're gonna have to do like a quadra through or something, like just because split it again, just so it wasn't as long of a chain. But we were able to. There wasn't any lag time with it, so it was very minimal, if anything. I think when we started doing, because I tried to do like a Y split cable for the Chase Bliss stuff, and I don't like doing the Y split cables just because it gets messy, and when you have a MIDI box,
get intermittent as well.
Intermittent, and there's just so many things, and if you wanted to swap it out, then he'd have to change the pin fit. It just became more and more, and it was really just like, I just would rather do differently. So yeah, so that was that really interesting one. I do want to, before we continue, break for an ad to talk about a few of our sponsors that we are so grateful to have. So the first ones are going to be the guys over at the Guitar Sanctuary. They are in McKinney, Texas, top boutique, store in the Dallas area. From PRS, the Mesa, to Fender custom shops. They have it all. Great friends of mine. And I just highly recommend going check them out. Give them a call, shoot them a text, talk to Trey or Daniel or Brian or Shane or Taylor when they're there, and let them help you get things set up. They have an Insight luthier that can help, a music academy. They've got it all. They're great. So go check them out at theguitarsanctuary.com. The next of our sponsors is going to be the guys over at Neural DSP, who we have already talked about so much because we love them. And Neural is amazing, and they have great stuff. And I fanboy over them every day because they're awesome. So Neural DSP, they have great products. They are even greater, I would say, with this 30% off discounts for their plugins. Because 30% off is, was it 70% from free?
That's it.
Look at that. See, I have it. So go check them out. 30% applies to all of their plugins. I'm sorry if you thought 30% meant their quad Cortexes. It does not. It is their plugins, which is well worth the price. As we've heard, they are planning to roll out a new firmware that can load their plugins into their quad Cortex unit, which is amazing, especially with their Morgan amp suite, quad Cortex control, which is now available, and you can easily load stuff, have all your favorite sounds. Check them out. Make sure you check out the Morgan amps that are on there. I don't think we're at 90 days on the Morgan amps. I could be wrong. So go ahead and use that discount code, Chairmen, CHAIRMEN, 30% off. Check them out and won't be disappointed. So
love it.
That's our first two round of sponsors, and I'm so grateful for them. I worked with the Guitar Sanctuary for over 6 years, and they were a phenomenal group of guys who just love to help any way that they can. So make sure you go check them out, give them some love, let them know the Chairman sent you, and do the same for Neural DSP guys. They are awesome, and they're just so helpful, and they have amazing products, and their plugin stuff is incredible. So next to none for sure. So moving on, Grant, would you love to share your next favorite board?
Yes, I actually would love that. Okay, let me share my screen.
And I'll make sure to do a better job describing these photos. I forget to explain.
Well,
I love
this
how
is a
simple that
tiny board. And for some people, maybe this is still a big board. I have no idea. If you're used to using an acoustic and a tuner or guitar into amp, this board is gigantic. But for those that are listening, we have a relatively small flat style. I think this is Aero as well, isn't it? And it has a full tone wah, a full tone 69 MK2 fuzz, an octa fuzz, a DD8, a TS9, Strobo Stomp, and a Goodwood output. And the reason I love this board, there's kind of two main things. It has the essentials only. So this customer, I think one of my favorite things, which we alluded to earlier in today's episode, the customer came to me knowing what he wanted, and he wanted kind of like an SRV Hendrix style board with a couple of little extras for other types of gigs he was playing. So he knew the sounds he was after. He had already come to me and he'd tried out a few different pedals, and these were the pedals he really kind of, bonded with. He really enjoyed this list of pedals.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the first thing. The other thing I love about this, which is a question I get quite often, and I think it's an assumption people have when they're building their own boards, but the layout you see, which again, going from right to left on the bottom row, is a Clyde Wah, TS9, 69 fuzz, octa fuzz, and then the top row from right to left is DD8, Strobo Stomp output, which is buffered output section with splitting and summing, all that type of thing. But what you see as far as the layout is not the signal chain. The signal chain is completely different and is not represented by the order that you see the pedals physically sitting on the board. And so the assumption I often see, I don't know if you get this as well, Brian, but the assumption I often get from guys like, oh, like I need to run my fuzz as far right as possible because that's first in the chain. But then that means it's harder to use because I want the wah on the far right. And so on the call, I'm listening. Why is it that we think, and I've been caught in this in the early days as well, why is it that we think we have to put our pedals down in the same order that they are physically run, cabled in, I should say, in our signal chain? So as I said, right to left, full tone, what the layout is full tone TS9, 69 fuzz, octafuzz, but the signal chain is the wah first, which is where it is placed on the board. But then we skip over the TS9, we go to the 69 fuzz, then into the octafuzz, then into the strobo stomp, which is top middle row, then back down to the TS9, which is kind of more bottom rightish, then back up to the top row to the DD8 digital delay, and then out to the output TX on the far left. So it's kind of going all over the place. And this was how we wanted to use the board. Is like, this position is how I want to use it while I'm playing, but it's not the signal chain I want. So I know that sounds so simple, but there are so many people that I've had conversations with that just make that assumption.
Yeah.
And I can see why. But I think I liked that on this board, that firstly, he knew the sounds he was after. He had done some A/B testing with pedals and found the ones that really worked for him. And then we were able to, we didn't have to stick with signal chain and layout being, mirror images of each other or following that same logic. We were able to switch up pedal position versus signal chain, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And under the board, I'm pretty sure it's just power. Yeah, that was the other thing. So under the board, if you're listening, we have an Ojai R30, which is a Strymon power supply, 5 outlets, which is perfect for this board. And then the power brick, where you actually plug in the mains power cable, the IEC cable, is, and again, this is super simple, but I love it, is just easily accessible, mounted underneath on the side of the board. So you can plug in your mains power cable on the same side that you plug in your guitar cable. And it's just a nice, simple, straightforward board. I love it. I think I love the fact that it's essentials only, and because it's essentials only, you need to get creative if you want to go outside of simple pedal combinations. You might have to change what your technique is. You might have to roll the volume pot back on your guitar to clean things up a bit. You need to get a little bit more creative with your actual playing, rather than I think what we often tend to do as guitar players is let's just buy the next piece of gear that will make my playing life easier. And I don't necessarily resonate with that. I like the struggle.
So I gotta ask, what's on a battery then? Because that's 7 pedals with a 5 power unit.
I think he might have put, again, I think this board was a couple of years ago. I think he might have put his fuzz on, or we split the power. But
like the tuner and the output box or something.
Here, let me zoom in. Power is labeled here.
Oh, nice.
Okay, we got the octafuzz and 69 on the same, tuner and TS9 on the same, and then DD8's on its own, and wah's on its own, and output TX is on its own power tap.
Nice. Okay, cool. I was curious about that. I was counting it. That's the first thing I thought of.
Yeah.
That's
So
nice.
for some of these simple like analog pedals, which is another common question, like the fuzz and the octafuzz, and even our output box, there's no reason why you can't run those off the same tap. It's when you get into digital stuff and stuff with a screen, like a tuner, that it's like, if I can isolate that, it's going to be a smart move to do so.
I actually built a board yesterday, and I had this high pitch ringing. And this is the thing, is this I've been doing this for over 10 years, and I still run into stuff where I'm like, that's weird. Why is it doing that? Or that, whatever. And I could not for the life of me figure it out. And I hit the tuner, and it was the new Walrus canvas.
Oh, you can't double up. Okay.
Can't double up. And
there are a lot of tuners you can, even though maybe it's not ideal, but you can with a lot of tuners. Yeah.
Polytune, the HD, Peterson, the TU, the trusty Boss tuners, all that stuff, especially because they have the courtesy, you can do like you can share that power. And I think the Peterson also has a courtesy power. So like there's and the Poly, all three of those do. So like I know you can do it, but the Canvas, because of the LCD, the LED screen or whatever that screen that they use, it requires so much power. I had multiple people that are like, hey, I'm getting this really weird buzz now from my board. I'm like, okay, well, how are you powering it? Oh, I'm sharing it with 3 other pedals. Okay, that's gonna be your issue. It's just needs so much. So it was one of those things yesterday. I was like, huh, well,
Yeah.
okay.
There's always
That's
exceptions to the rule as well. Like overdrives are usually safe.
Yeah.
But then you get into some clones or some clones that use charge pumps and they are not safe. Yep. And so I guess at the end of the day, like we've said many, many times and will keep saying, is when you're doing your board setup, like especially if you need to share power, just test it first. Get a daisy chain, plug in both power taps to both pedals, to one power tap, cable it up really quickly with some spare cables, plug it into an amp, and see if you get any odd noises coming through or anything like that. Like, it's better to take that extra 5 minutes, even though when you're under the pump, it's like, I don't have the time. But I guarantee if you finish your whole board and then have to change how the whole thing's powered, it's gonna take an hour versus a 5-minute test you could have done right at the beginning.
Exactly.
So it's well worth it to double check this stuff.
Well, and just that actually reminded me, Grant, as you were talking, is like, on social media and everything, and wherever you're listening, YouTube or whatever it is, it's so easy to see what we're doing and see these boards and see how complex they are. Like, that's not a normal board. A lot of these complex boards are just like, at least for me, they're very experimental boards that people want to run, and that's great. And I think that's the cool thing about being a musician, is that there's not really a rule book when it comes to it. It's just like, it's whatever you want, kind of things. Like, it's, you like Fenders, I like Gretches. Like, there's difference, and like everyone can have their own opinion. But like this kind of stuff where like I and I have to be careful through social media, reading comments and stuff, is like seeing people commenting like when you post a beautiful photo of a board and it's clean and the runs are so clean, it looks really nice. And then the first comment's like, I would hate for a cable to break on that. Or like, people are always find, something wrong with the board. And I what's really interesting about doing setups like this and how clean they can be is that I have, from experience, as we all have had, built boards, and then you're playing somewhere or something breaks or you're sitting at home. Like, I had a guy who built a rig, and he said it took him like 50 hours to build a rig, which it should have taken 10, because he ran into all these crazy issues. And then, as someone that does it full time, Grant, Mason, everyone who does this has done this, like, this is our job to do this, so you don't have to spend 40, 50 hours away from your family or your kids. Maybe you're single, whatever, away from your friends, whatever you're doing. But we're laying foundation. So I think it's important to view a lot of these boards and be like, oh, I could have done that. Yeah, you can do that. And if you want to do that, that's fantastic. And we applaud you and we encourage it. There's also people that like don't have the time. So a lot of these really complex boards may seem complex because they are complex, but it fits the musician and it fits everything. So I think it's really cool to be able to see these different types of setups, because you really start to get into other people's minds on how they're doing things. So I think
it's also funny, like with the people that say like, oh, I could do that.
Oh yeah.
We were exactly those people. Like, I can't blame people when they say that, because like I looked up boards like, oh, I could do that, and then you start doing it, you realize oh, there's a bit to learn here, and then you come across a few of those times where it's like ripping your hair out trying to figure out where this noise is coming from, and feeling like I don't know if you get this, feeling your chest like tighten up, like, why can't I figure this out? It should be so simple. And then you figure it out and you add that to your list of your toolkit, as it were, of, now next time when this happens, instead of it taking 5 hours, it'll probably take me 20 minutes. And you get like 30 of those instances over, 10 years of doing this, and you become way more efficient at building these boards. But I absolutely think if you look at these boards and you say, I can do that, you should like absolutely go and do it. If that's something that you enjoy, like a lot of my customers, they just buy cables off the site and they want to do it themselves because they enjoy the process of building their board. And I think that's awesome. Like that is, you absolutely should not pay someone to set up your board if you enjoy the process. And just ask us questions if you get stuck. Like just, I don't know, reach out and figure it out, with some help. But I think there are a lot of people that cannot be bothered setting up their rig. And they're just, that's not something I want to do. I want to play guitar. Yeah, so you set up my board. I'm going to keep playing guitar. Let me know when it's done. And I think for those people, getting someone to set up your board is great. But I've never said that, everyone should get their board set up by a pro. I don't think that's necessary at all. I think there are certain people that should, and other people that don't have the time. Maybe they wish they did, but they just don't. And that's the reality. But I do think it's funny. Like it's, you can kind of read into those comments a couple of ways of like, oh, I could do that. Like, you're demeaning like the last 10 years of my skill set and what I've developed. That's one way to kind of look at it. Or if you're willing to put in the time, do it. Like it's a ton of fun. If you're that kind of minded person, it's a lot of fun.
And if you like building and you want to figure out, but don't know how to do, signal chain and stuff, the great thing is Grant or I or Mason, we all have these consult stuff packages that you can do is you can book time. And I just did one with a guy last week, and that's no plug or anything. I just plug. A shameless, I guess it is a shameless plug.
I mean, what can I say? It's at omilionaudio.com. I mean, whatever. Here's the link.
Whatever.
In the bottom.
Omilion Audio, no problem. Yeah, just scroll down to the bottom. It's a brand new site. No, I just think it's cool to see people, especially because, dude, I had this, so we're getting super off topic, but I think I had this, I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook, okay? Because Facebook likes to remind me of my flaws. And that's on the memories tab where it's on this day 10 years ago. And usually it's like back in the day, I used to think I had to put like Brian Omilion is whatever. And 90% of the times is I was making mashed potatoes, which I don't understand why I had to. Yeah, I don't understand why I had to tell people that.
Did you put raw garlic in your mashed potatoes?
I don't remember because it was 20 years ago when I was 11, so I don't quite remember. But
I don't think 11-year-olds usually cook with raw garlic, but
no, I don't think so. I think they cooked with heart potatoes or instant. But I had this when I had first started building boards, it was like 10, 12 years ago, and it was like building rigs hit me up $10 an hour or something. And I remember like going, man, the amount of things that I didn't know that I was still learning, and I was using solderless, so I really didn't know what I was doing. And it's just it's cool just to see the opportunity through you guys. And it's crazy. I said, you said, and I will say too, I'm always learning things from you guys, which is really cool. So, that's what a lot of these setups and stuff were like come out of clients. When clients come to you with the idea and they know what they want, it makes things a little bit it makes things fun because you're not blankly going into, it's like going into a car dealership and it's like, I don't know, I want my car painted just, paint a color, and then you paint in pink and then they hate it and then you hate it and you're like, oh shoot. But like when you come in like, I want my car to be gold, and then you get that gold car back and it looks amazing and you're so excited. So for whatever analogy I had to say, that it's cool to have clients come to us with builds. And this setup I'm about to show right here is that exact thing. If I can get my,
but while you're bringing that
am
up,
I sharing?
Not yet. While you're bringing that up, I'll go through our sponsors.
Yeah, go ahead and do some sponsors while
I want to chat about the
last
two sponsors that make this podcast possible, as we like to say. The first one of my favorites, longtime favorites, and we're actually just chatting about these guys before we hit record today, is Mono Creators. Brian recently got a new guitar. If it's there, you got to put it on screen, man. Brian recently got a new guitar, and it has 6 strings. It has 2 pickups. It does not have a case.
Does not.
And so Brian's like, man, I got to get a mono case. And like, it's just where you go. If you need a soft bag, you go to Mono. And so Mono just has some incredible gear that we have both been using for years and years. I have never once had to replace a piece of mono gear because it wore out or it was used too much. Like, it's long lasting gear, whether it's backpacks, gig bags for your guitar, dual gig bags for multiple guitars. They came out, I think it was late last year, with a new shape of pedal power supplies. So high current outlets, all isolated, but it's more of like that power strip kind of shape, long and narrow. So it's perfect to slot in under one of their angled boards and not take up space that you need for long line or junction or a MIDI splitter box like Brian had on one of his setups that we were just chatting about before. Love their power supplies, pedal boards, gig bags, accessories. And of course, if you are someone that likes to save money, if you're like, there's a sale on, that's for me, like myself and Brian, then you can also use the code Chairmen, CHAIRMEN, and get 10% off at monocreators.com. So that's Chairmen for 10% at monocreators.com. Lastly, I want to tell you guys about BTPA or Bestronics. One of the best people, I would say, in America is Brad. Brad is, he is simply the best. Brad is over at BTPA, and he is the human encyclopedia for part numbers and basically saving the day if you need something for a pedalboard build. Whether, for me, it's often D-socket connectors. I know Brian uses the DC connectors, the 2.1 barrels, cables, looms. They also do rack builds and tons of quad Cortex redundant builds, fly racks, in-ear rigs. They do so much. If you need accessories for your pedalboard build, go to BTPA. You'll be glad that you did. Ask for Brad. And of course, tell him the Chairman sent you. If you want to save money again, you can use the code DACHAIRS, DACHAIRS, for 10% off at btpa.com. That's it. Those are our last two sponsors that are making this podcast possible and making this next photo you're about to bring up possible. Brian, yes. Why don't you share the screen and tell us about this board?
Very much so.
Ooh.
All right. Yeah. This is a monster one. I gotta say, I think it was like a 38 by 22 flat board. So envision, as you're driving down the road, drinking your Dunkin' Donuts or Tim Hortons or Starbucks coffee, this 38 by 22 flat
38
series
inches. Jeez. That's
massive.
Over 3 feet wide. That's a meter. That's more than a meter for all you metric folk out there.
I actually just placed an order last night while I was sitting in my cozy bed. A board 42 by 14, and it's for the guitars from the band Spirit Box. So it's a kill. I'm excited to build that one. So that's the largest one.
38.
Today, 38 is still nuts. So 38 by 22, a custom Goodwood audio. If I can zoom in, I will zoom in. This Goodwood audio collab.
Thank you for the support.
Yeah, junction box and this Audition.
And another Goodwood junction.
Another Goodwood junction, which this is a stereo in. This is basically a stereo in split. It does. I'll explain. It does a whole bunch of crazy stuff.
Jeez.
And so we have a Vox. This was a wah Ernie Ball volume pedal. This Transformer Z or whatever pedal. A Smiley Fuzz, an Archer Clone pedal.
Like clone, yep.
Clone, yeah. if I can get my tags off. A Vertex Boost, shout out to Mason.
Hey.
Ditto X2, I think they called that. A
bunch
Lex,
of Strymon.
Bunch of Strymons. Lex Strymon, Deco Strymon, Flint Strymon. This was the Astra by UA.
Right? Yeah.
Then we got an H9 underneath, an Iridium, a Zuma, a WL50 wireless from Boss, the custom junction from Goodwood, which I'll explain. And then going up to the top row, we have an HD Peterson tuner, a POG, another
with no
H9.
MIDI mod?
No MIDI mod. Yeah, no MIDI,
Dual
no
H9s.
MIDI control.
Jeez.
Dual H9. of what's this one? The Volante from Strymon and the Strymon Big Sky. So
My
what's
goodness.
interesting is about this setup and how crazy it is basically we get down to, I'm trying to remember because it's been a while. Basically, the signal chain is kind of how this is set up. You know, the volume is after the drives and everything, but basically the Vox into the Trans Z, into the Smiley, the Archer, the Boost, um, and then out of the Boost, it went into the volume, and out of the volume, and this is something that it was kind of a collaboration when it came to like actually like the signal chain, just because he wanted to do so much stuff with it. Um, but that basically split. Just trying to remember. The volume pedal then hits the Lex, the Deco. The Pog is somewhere towards the front of the chain. I can't exactly remember. I'll have to look at back in my archives. But basically, the junction boxes, these were two different boxes I had you guys do, is because we did the audition so he could audition, which was a last minute add-on. He last minute wanted to be able to audition stuff, so that's why it's sitting on top. But the Goodwood audio box, the big box over here, is actually doing 4 or 5 cable method. I remember you guys did this one for me. I had a headphone out. It has XLRs to do direct out into the system, wireless or line, toggle switch, ground face but the smaller box over here is actually doing, so it's going stereo. I think it's stereo in, okay, that's what it was. It goes stereo out of the Big Sky into here.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's going splitting stereo out, one to go straight to this junction box.
So just out of the board.
Yeah, so I'm trying. Okay, so it goes out of the Big Sky. Yeah, out. Yeah, so one splits to go to the junction box to go straight in the amps, and the other side splits into the Iridium, and then the Iridium goes stereo out to the side of the junction too. He basically wanted the Iridium on its separate signal from everything, and
they could run
I think
amps
these
or Iridium at the same time, right?
Yeah, and I can't remember what these ones are because there's 4 jacks on each side. I'd have to look back at it. But 2 of the jacks, I think, were a buffer or something similar to that. But it's a studio board, so it's very, I mean, everything is very well. Oh, and the express. So we also did the volume in the Vertex, in the Vertex Boost expression jack.
Nice.
I couldn't remember. So it's to this one I think was probably one of my favorites just because of how well it had to be designed. Like this R30 power supply is actually, will, like, when it closed it, there's a paper thin of space between these two. No noise, no nothing like that, which is super nice. So there's a lot of power, lots of, just pretty much everything you can think of on this board, because he wanted to be able to, and it arrived in one piece.
Beautiful.
The Lord, that was my biggest thing, is when these bigger boards go through shipping. But yeah, this one I think was the most complex type of, like, it looks like a lot, but it's just a lot of back and forth wiring and stuff. So this this took a lot of, like, these channels here on basically the top and bottom. I don't know if you can see the cursor or not. The top and bottom of the middle row between those pedals, the channels of cabling, I had to be really particular, like making sure I had output cables from the Big Sky, making sure I had output cables from the Astria, input cables to the Iridium, output cables from the Iridium. And there was just all these things that I, like, it's not as easy as zipping down one cable run. I have to think of like 9 different types of runs all at the same time. So it started to get really like I had to have a checklist. Okay, I ran that. I had to have that. I had to use painter's tape. I had to label that end and stuff. And then the last minute, let's add an audition. I had to go and I had to rewire a couple things to make it fit. So after the Vertex boost, but before the wet stuff. So like it started to get really crazy, but it was a lot of fun and I enjoyed it. And he had that second H9 mainly just to have like I think it was like a slapback or something that he said he always left on. So he just wanted something. So it was a really cool and fun build, and I enjoyed it. It was like I said, it was massive. Oh, that is not a video. That is not a photo. But yeah, so I would say that was that one, which was super cool, and I enjoyed it.
Love it.
To this day, like I said, I hope I explained that as best as I could. Just imagine a 38 by 22 board. And I think what we can do is try to link some of these photos or something so you guys could see them. Maybe some past posts or something, just so you can see some of these reference photos if you're listening. But like that one, that is one that you can look at and go, oh, that's way too much stuff. But for that musician, it's not. Like I'm building another 38 by 22 studio board for a musician, and she just kept going, I don't know if I want this. I feel bad having this many pedals. And I'm like, well, why do you feel bad? Oh, well, because it just seems like a lot. Well, what is it for? Well, it's for the studio. Okay, well, are you trying to just pull stuff off of a shelf? No, I kind of do it in the moment. Okay, well, then having a larger board, it's fine. Like having the option and options galore there, there's nothing wrong with that. And that's exactly what this guy, he wanted every option that you could think of. So we put as much as we could on here without it getting too crazy. And he's been using it ever since. So
crazy.
Yeah, man.
Well, if you want a crazy board, I have one more.
Yeah, do it.
I'll go through it quickly because I know we're running out of time, and you might still have a board you want to share. But this board highlights my love for expression. I love expression pedals.
Yeah.
Let me just share my screen here.
Side note, since the launch of the new Tone X1, I'm waiting for someone to request the smallest size flat series board that can have a chocks on it and a Goodwood long line, and then just have two like Tone X1s on it,
tiny.
like a baby, like a little baby, look like a sandwich. Side note, while you put, oh my gosh, I love this one though.
This is board 1 of 2. This is the small board, and what if you're board. Not if you're listening and you are not watching, it has a Felix, which is kind of an acoustic, a Grace Felix, kind of like acoustic EQ sim type thing. Has a B1G, which is a boost, a Goodwood RMT, Game Changer Plus pedal, 2 Layla dual expressions, a wet switch, and a tuner. So it's mainly expression plus pedal boost Felix. And this is board 1. So this is if he's going to be using acoustic and electric, he'll use this board. Underneath the board, it gets kind of fun. You have a Chalks DC7, a Goodwood Junction, which splits the signal, and a Sound Sculpture Volcano. And the Volcano is basically an expression or MIDI controlled, in this case it's expression, controlled volume. So he can hook up an expression pedal and digitally control his volume via the Volcano. So the Volcano actually adjusts the signal level. But then there's switching you can do to use the expression for other things, which connects to the big board. And the Goodwood Junction allows him to use this board as a standalone and use dedicated dry and acoustic outs, or send signal to the main board, which then just turns this into one gigantic system. And there's a whole bunch, as you can see on kind of from this under photo, there's a whole bunch of side mounts, dry outs, expression throughs, acoustic out. I think there's a secondary output for just a dedicated dry amp for this board. There's a ton going on, 2 acoustic inputs and 1 electric input on this small board. And then we go to the big main board, and we have, a real Klon, a PBC-10, a Quartz, compressor, hologram, microcosm, Future Factory, which is delay, some Tonezar pedals, which are very rare and very expensive, New Neighbor Illumin, and then what's in the top? That's another...
That's the Free the Tone EQ.
EQ, thank you. And then another tuner. And so what you can do with this board, and underneath I have to show you as well. The reason I love this board, some people, probably most people, are going to look at this and say, like, this is so overkill.
Holy moly.
But under the board, you have a Dream, a Ruby, a Pog 2, a Phantom Power Box by RJM, which I'll tell you about in a sec, a MIDI splitter, another Volcano, a Goodwood Junction, and then a whole bunch of patching on the side panel of this Creation Elevation board. Or actually, this was done by
that's a Caseman.
Caseman. This was Caseman, so he got it shipped over from Australia. And the box, the Ruby, is dedicated to a dry electric output only. It's in its own loop, which is controlled by the PBC amp switching jack, so you can turn the Ruby on or off depending if you're going to use a real amp or the Ruby. A parallel acoustic dry out. Then you have Dream for the electric wet outs, which again can be turned on and off via the PBC. Parallel acoustic left and right outs. So he can run electric in wet, dry, wet with or without amp sims or any combination. He can run acoustic in wet, dry, wet with or not with or without. He can do acoustic in wet, dry, wet from mono to wet, dry, wet. And the reason this board planning wise took about 6 months. We were going back and forth for months trying to get everything locked in. The pedals took a long time to make sure that they were what he wanted. A lot of testing, a lot of, tested against this version or that version. So the planning that went into this was huge. But then the other thing I like about it is that it is future proofed, so that if and when he moves to a GT floorboard by RJM, he already has the box by RJM built into this board, so that this board sends one 7-pin cable to the GT, and now the GT is powered by this board, but also is the master controller for this board and the small board. And so these boards communicate back and forth to each other via MIDI. Then the GT can become the master and control both boards if it ever needs to be plugged in with one cable. And then obviously he has a bunch of different routing options that he can use or not use at his discretion over, a MIDI, the two different volumes, depending on if he's using the one small board or both boards or just the big board. And so he's been using this board for about 18 months. He's probably the best customer I've had as far as being able to take the RJM products and just dive into it head first and learn it all himself very quickly. It's been very impressive. And and he's been using it ever since, still loving the board, still using it very regularly. And it's been really cool to see a big board like this go out and get used really well right from day one. Yeah. Rather than you could look at this and say, oh, he's got a bunch of options he'll never use, but he's actually using it really consistently. And so I really appreciate that and love that that's the case. So this was a giant board, also one that showed up in one piece, which you always kind of had this, oh, please God, let this show up just as it is right now. It's rare that obviously damage happens in shipping, but when it does, it's pretty devastating after you put in, like this board was 45, 50 hours of work. And so it was, it's very nice when it shows up in one piece.
Man, I'm in love with that little board size. That's case,
cool.
Man. I'm always a sucker for those like 18 by 18. I've built a lot of flat boards that were like squared, and all longer ones, and they're a lot of fun. And we'll wrap it up with this super short little guy I did for this one for a client, which was another one of those super knew what he wanted kind of things.
Love it.
So
DC2W.
What's cool? Very simple. Yeah. So this board, what's cool is you see the wetter box from GigRig, and how it's all set up is you go into the input box, just this passive input box I made, and we're going down to the GigRig. This is I think a 20 by 11. I think actually this was the Vertex travel compact board, because there's another travel the 20 by 11 board, and we have this GigRig Quartermaster 6 on here. So we're going into from the passive box into the Quartermaster, And then immediately the tuner, we have a sending to a tuner. We have obviously no return because we wanted the signal to be muted. So he can tune without having to go and tiptoe and step on it. And the cool thing is he likes the quartermaster, so he can do those different, like, hit this switch and this other relay turns off kind of thing. But in the second spots is actually the wetter box, and how the wetter box is set up is kind of unique. Is we're using, and it's the way in which it was entailed to be built, is the horse meat and the dimension C are actually in the wetter box, and he likes blending his overdrive and that modulation in that one pedal and that one loop. So he'll blend the two and then step on it when he wants it. But then you got like the DM2, which is on here, a dispatch master from Earthquaker Devices, I think that's who it is. And then the Dark World. Those are all mono into the rest of the Quartermaster
being a reverb by Chase Bass.
Yeah. So we got the Dark World reverb. Quartermaster, I think it's like not Quartermaster. The dispatch master is like a delay. Another delay from Boss, the DM2. DC2 from Moss. Horse meat from PRS. Top left corner, we have a TC Electronics Ditto Plus, which is in the very last loop. So he can record, step and turn on the loop if he wants. He can turn the loop off and the loop could keep going. And then we're going out of the quartermaster into the passive box again. Super simple setup, but he was just like, hey, I want these things. It was one of those like, I want A, B, C, and D. Had to confirm one little detail is like power or something, because we kept running into not having enough space. So that's where it was like, well, do I just plug in and out of the quartermaster? Like that was the thing we considered, was just plugging into the side and straight out of the quartermaster, but didn't want jacks and stuff to get messed up. So there was a lot of like, just like little things we had to kind of fine tune. Really simple. Just I labeled what was in the wetter box just to keep it really simple. And he can just really blend everything really easily, and it's compact. So that's probably like one of my favorite little things. And it's always fun just to do those, like to do a big massive board and then just do this like really simple generics, like carry on size board. They're a lot of fun. They're all fun to do. So yeah, I would say those are my three favorites. I love all the rigs that I've done. I love the process of talking through ideas, and when the client and I both are like, oh my gosh, that would be super cool, let's do that. Like it's at the end of the day, we're musicians and we like doing this, even though it's our jobs and our companies and stuff. It's still fun to do it, and I enjoy it. So those are mine. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. I think hearing you say you love all your rigs equally, I'm gonna call a little bit of BS on that one, Brian. It's like when people ask you, like, which kid do you love the most? You say, oh, I love them all the same. Like, well, really? But no, it is a lot of fun. I think the rigs that I enjoy the most are the ones where there's a good blend of collaboration and flexibility, but also a pretty clear end goal. And how we get there is something that we can have a conversation about. And then I think you can really put your heads together and come up with something pretty special. And there are just those rigs, like, I mean, the ones that we've kind of chatted about today, like there are those rigs that just kind of click. It's like that came together really nicely. But I think the common thread is when there's collaboration and back and forth, and you just get a chance to really kind of hash out some ideas. The ones that tend to be rushed, as in like I heard from the customer on a Monday, they need it to be in the shop the following week, and it needs to be delivered by that Friday. Like those ones, you just don't have the time to collaborate and to really come up with and hash out, like, why'd you think about that? Or why do you want the horse meat? Or why the dispatch master instead of a DD7? And I think if you get that time to really talk things through, you end up with a better product with more flexibility at the end of the day. So I would say, not when possible, not having to rush these things. You just end up with a better result, in my opinion. So, but yeah, I think it's a ton of fun. Again, I don't want this, and it's probably too late saying this at the end of the podcast. last thing I want is for this to come across as a like get a setup done. I do not think again that everyone needs to be getting a setup. I just think it's good to talk about some of these rigs, why they came together nicely, and what you guys as listeners and even us, chatting now, what we can take away for the next build to improve the process, make it a bit more smooth, and end up with a better board and ultimately better gigs and better playing at the end of the day. And I think that's kind of where I would like this to be kind of coming from my perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, this is definitely not a like cash grab in a way of like, you have to get a setup or done. This is just like, if you're thinking about doing a setup, just take the time, plan it out, write it down, go on pedalplayground.com. They have this new cool feature, excuse me, where you can actually save your file. So you can save it.
Finally.
Yes.
That's awesome.
And you can send it to people and then they can open it. It's the best thing. Oh my
goodness.
It is
That's
it was like a trial or like it was a new feature, so there might be some bugs. But I have like 9 files saved on my
that makes me so happy.
Computer, and it just populates it. Because the amount of times I've had to go back and redo the quote, or I've had 15 tabs open on my browser for just different pedalboard playground setups. It's just nuts. So
amazing.
Just take the time, draw it out. There's been plenty of times that I would just draw out different stuff. Like I use, if you have a subscription thing with Canva, I use this thing called Canva, and I actually will do a mock-up in my pedal playground, screenshot it, put it in Canva, and then I'll take the little line feature and I'll actually like map out. And you can do like the elbow lines or the dotted lines and just map out and figure out how you want it to be. Because the last thing you want to do is when you're building it and you do that perfect cable run and you have everything done is you have to, clip up or pull up cables just because you forgot 1 or 2 more cables. So just like take the time, like just learn what you're trying to do, watch YouTube videos, and just have fun doing it. It's a lot of fun. This stuff is fun to do. And yeah, that's all.
I would mirror that with I think the boards that go the smoothest as far as the build goes are the ones that have been front loaded on prep time. There's a lot of time that went into writing down everything that needs a power tap. What voltage does it need? Where is that going to come from on the power supply? Do I have enough variable voltage outlets if I'm not using chocks? And like, especially for me on power, and then doing your layout with the jacks in so that you can make sure you got spacing and room for cable channels and all that. If you spend an extra hour on the front just planning all that stuff out, you will save that plus some on the back end when you're building, of just sitting, like I know we've both had those builds, you're just sitting, just looking at the board, waiting for the answer to come to you because maybe you didn't get the amount of prep time on the front that you really should have. And the amount of time you can save when you're confident moving forward, like I know this is the next cable because I planned for this, or I know this power tap goes here because I already labeled it. All that stuff, it adds up to just a much quicker build that is lower stress and more pleasant at the end of the day. So definitely prep.
I did final note. I did a board for a guy. This is years ago. I had to have been. This is even before I was at the Guitar Sanctuary. And he cramped everything he could. Every crevice, every little notch had something on it. And I remember one of the pedals was like sideways. And I was like, oh, it's how are you going to get to that? Oh, I'll figure it out. And it's because he was he was impatient and he just wanted to get the board done as quickly as possible, that he just started squeezing stuff and not accounting for space on foot switches and boots or shoes or whatever you're wearing, that within I think a week he had to come back and spend extra money having me rewire it onto a bigger board because he wanted to save $10. Like it was like a $10 difference costed him a couple $100 to take it all apart. So that is another, just take your time, just plot it out realistically what's gonna work, like, and be careful what you stack on power supplies.
Yep.
So,
and what power supply are you using?
Exactly. What power supply are you using? Well, that's it for this week. Grant, would you like to close this out by jumping back on the Miata?
Oh yeah, man. This manual Miata has served us well for the last couple of years, and we're going to keep using it. So
Let's do it.
I'm going to punch down into second gear here and speed off into the sunset with you, Brian. How romantic.
Awesome.
And we will
Let's
be
do it.
back next week for another episode on Chairman of the Boards. See you guys then.
All right. See ya.